Hello, everyone. All right, I'm just coming in hot. I usually do a countdown, I have a plan, but it's been that kind of a week. I'm Rosa Linda Román. I go by Rosa Linda, and every week I come on here onto these social channels and share a chapter from my book, Losing Sight of the Shore: How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family. And usually I pre-read my chapters and I have a plan and I try to do it with a little bit of professionalism. But this week is different. We've had attended a family funeral of my husband's uncle in Colorado, and it's just been a heavy week with a lot of stuff going on. So apologies, I had to push this back by 2 days, but I wanted to still come on here and honor my commitment to read a chapter a week of my book. And the one I'm reading today is, if I can find it, okay, here we go. So this is Losing Sight of the Shore: How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family, Chapter 18, Color Code Systems. No liveaboard memoir would be complete without a section or two about the not-so-smooth sailing we encountered along the way. And I'm not talking about actual sailing. I'm talking about the interpersonal dynamics that happen when you put 6 people and a dog on a boat for an extended period of time. When people ask me what the worst thing is about living on a boat, I usually respond with something like, the worst thing and the best thing about living on a boat is the same: the fact that it forces you to deal with your family in tight quarters. This means that there is no room for holding a grudge. There is nowhere to run away to unless you are jumping or throwing someone overboard. No room for problems to fester. You learn to communicate more effectively as a family, and it is very, very hard work. As I write this, back on land now, I know that it isn't just a boat thing. It's a life thing. That hard work of communicating effectively with each family member in the middle of changing seasons of our lives and the varying conditions of our spirits may be the most important thing we ever do. I like to believe that the tools we learned on the boat are helping us even now. But on days like today, when I find myself struggling to hold a simple conversation about homeschooling, lack of productivity, and consequences with a certain preteen, I must somehow remind myself that this is a constant work in progress, one which ebbs and flows like the tides. This morning's talk left me feeling like I was back to square one, when said preteen yelled, "You never listen, and every single thing you say is the opposite of what I'm saying." But then when that same preteen chose not to slam a door and returned to apologize to me 5 minutes later so that we could continue working through the difficult conversation, and ended with, "Okay, mommy, I will think about what you said," I couldn't help but give thanks for small victories, and then thought, that's a boat thing. On the Dawn Treader, we kind of perfected the idea that everyone is entitled to be mad sometimes, and that it is how you choose to handle that anger that really matters for your well-being and the long-term joy in your relationships. The general rule was that when you were angry, as long as you don't do permanent damage to someone else's spirit or property, then we can work through it together. But we didn't come to this place without some serious hurdles. There were many moments where I thought that we would never be able to work through someone's anger or communicate with each other effectively. And there are plenty of examples on the water and in land-based families of times when people failed to do so. Mostly this failure is quiet, as in one week you see a couple sailing together, and the next week you see the guy on the beach at Chat and Chill and ask where the better half is, and he says, "Oh, she went back home. She never liked the boat." Sometimes these failures are loud, and they usually happen quite publicly during anchoring or docking. It should be stated here that just because people are screaming at each other in a crowded marina or anchorage doesn't mean that they have relationship problems. I do understand that lots of people are perfectly happy with this arrangement, but in our family, if there is screaming going on, drawing stares from everyone around us, then this falls into the category of communication failure. On more than one occasion, I have witnessed a husband at the helm screaming obscenities at his wife as she tries to place a fender, toss a line to a dockhand, or give directions while dropping anchor. And truth be told, on more than one occasion, I was the wife in this scenario, minus the obscenities. Gratefully, except gratefully, these were the exception in our 3 years of living on boats together. And they happened not because Nathan didn't love me or because he thought that I was an idiot, but because he felt like there was a serious risk to life, limb, or property at the time. But this was something that happened much more on our first live-aboard adventure aboard Hakuna Matata than it did on the Dawn Treader. The reason for this was hard work on our relationship and our communication. On Hakuna Matata, we developed a few systems that made communication much smoother as a family. One which worked really well was the color code system. We developed this because of the yelling. Whereas my husband is almost eerily calm in an emergency, which is probably what makes him a wonderful doctor, I am a hot mess. There may be panic, there may be screaming, and I have been known to do exactly the wrong thing as a result. This can be a real problem when you are first mate on a boat and the kids are looking to you to decide whether they should panic or not. And while that may be my less than effective coping method, Nathan's way of taking command can be off-putting too. In an emergency where he hears himself giving firm commands matter-of-factly, I may interpret that as he's yelling at me. And of course, each child and any other person who happens to be on board has their own style of handling an emergency. In other words, chaos can often spark chaotic communication. We learned this fact the hard way when we were living on Hakuna Matata. We were on a long day sail from Las Olas Marina in Fort Lauderdale to the Lake Worth Inlet in West Palm Beach. The conditions were choppy and rough. We had a guest on board who was so seasick he could only move his body to get to the railing and puke overboard. In other words, it was an awful day already. Then things got really awful. It was one of those moments that we all remember quite vividly and will do so for the rest of our lives. Since he was the one who had to handle the lion's share of what happened next, I will let Nathan describe the scene in his own words. Quote, "Suddenly the boat turned upwind, meaning it turned into the wind abruptly and became uncontrollable. With 8-foot seas and the sail luffing in the wind, it made what was previously uncomfortable turn quickly to unbearable. The wind was buffeting the sails in every direction, forcing the boat to move chaotically and dangerously in every direction. I immediately dropped the sail and started the engines to get the boat under control. But when we started to move forward, we again turned abruptly, and the helm was not responding to any of our controls. I tried to turn the boat, idling it into the waves so that we could figure out what was wrong, but each time I tried to move forward, it turned abruptly into the starboard side. Nothing I could do would control the direction of the boat was going. We were about 5 miles due east of the Lake Worth Inlet, and the wind was blowing hard from the west, pushing us even farther away. I tried to ask for help from the crew, but nobody could function. I tried to figure out what was wrong with the rudder, but we were in 8-foot confused seas, which means waves were coming at us from every direction. When I tried to get a visual on the rudders in the rear, I couldn't see anything because of the wave frequency. Rosa Linda tied a rope around my waist in order to try to stabilize me so that I could see the rudders, which are underneath the boat. However, the boat was pitching so much that I would be 6 or 7 feet out of the water and then plunge into the water, which was extremely dangerous and unsafe. I was the only person able to function with the seasickness except for my wife, and since there was no way if I fell over for anyone to come get me, I had to make a decision to call sea tow or risk my family's safety. It was around 5 o'clock at night when sea tow arrived. When they hooked us up and tried to haul us in, we still kept turning, making it difficult for the towing boat to tow us back. The next morning, in the light of the day at the dock, and $700 later, it took only 5 minutes to realize the rudder had jumped the stay and was sideways in the direction of the boat. This would have been impossible to repair at sea in these conditions, but was an easy fix in the calm water back by the dock. Aside from giving you a little glimpse into how Captain Nathan's mind works and why he is such a blessing in my life, not to mention how different our communication styles are, this also gives you a good idea of the reason the rudder failure prompted us to develop our color code system for safety. The idea of this system, and really every system we ever developed while living on a boat with our kids, is to cut down on yelling and help everyone on board feel more comfortable with what is going on, especially in an emergency. Code green on a normal day, say when we are hanging out at a marina or on the hook somewhere in calm conditions, anyone can go anywhere on the boat and talk to the captain and the first mate whenever they want. We call this code green. It may surprise some of our land-loving friends to know that most days on the boat, we were at code green. I would say only about 5% of the time was spent on the other color codes, which were as follows. Code yellow. This color code is for whenever we are facing a difficult situation, which is not an emergency, which requires our undivided attention. During a code yellow, no one is to speak to the captain or the first mate unless we were talking to them specifically. This was not the time to come up to one of us and say, "Mommy, my sister took my iPad," for example. During code yellow, the other crew members could go wherever they wanted on the boat, as long as they were safe and out of the way of wherever the current activity was taking place. If we were anchoring, then the kids knew to stay out of the helm where Captain Nate was and away from the bow where I was stationed. If we were docking, at least back when the kids were too little to hold a fender or catch a rope, they would have to steer clear of the port or starboard side unless we specifically asked them to help. The only crew member who seemed to always have blatant disregard for our color code system was Nala, our previous German Shepherd Tova on Hakuna Matata, which may explain why she got yelled at more than the rest of the crew. Code orange. This is one of the two color codes that no one ever wanted to be on. Basically, code orange meant that we were in an emergency situation. Every member of the crew was supposed to sit in one designated location, usually the main salon or the outside salon areas, without talking to await instructions. Everyone would have life vests on, and the captain and first mate would be actively trying to handle whatever emergency was at hand. Gratefully, there were only 2 code oranges in the 3 years we lived aboard. The first was the broken rudder situation I mentioned above. The second was on our first crossing from the Bahamas back to Florida at the end of our time on Hakuna Matata, when the weather turned unexpectedly, leaving our little family bashing into violent waves for hours and hours. In the end, we got through that terrible crossing and thankfully managed to regain our love of sailing and the live-aboard life years later with Dawn Treader. And then, of course, Code Red. Simply put, Code Red means abandoned ship. There is a whole list of things that might lead to this call, but gratefully, we never had one of them on the Dawn Treader or Hakuna Matata. And I'm knocking wood that we don't on our next boat. Although we developed this list after the broken rudder incident on Hakuna Matata, it proved just as effective while we were living on the Dawn Treader. With 3 kids on board now, instead of the 2 we had on Hakuna Matata, the system proved even more important. But the 3 kids, 2 of whom were much older than the 2 and 4-year-olds they were when we developed the system, also means 3 more opinions about your color code system and its effectiveness, which I believe is a great indicator that you are doing something right as a boat parent or a parent in general. When your children start to alter the systems you created to make them work more effectively, then you have empowered them and helped them feel like valuable members of the crew. Out of these opinions, we learned that sometimes code yellow is too restrictive, especially when we have been island hopping and anchoring is just another part of our regular routine. Why can't they be at the bow with the first mate, Mommy, if they stay out of the way and are available to help? Good point. Empowered children are great, but can lead to more problems if left unchecked, especially as they move into the teenage years. As they step into their own power, there can be new tension in old systems. As a mother, this is hard for me. You go from having these little creatures who need you on the most primal level for their very survival to strong, independent young adults who want to change your brilliant systems and do things their own way. Not easy in any living situation, but potentially disastrous in tight quarters while living on a boat. Thank goodness for family meetings. Our family meetings, which usually take place at Shabbat or the breakfast table, are where we clear the air, listen to each other, and work through any issues that are standing in our way. Our meetings are far from perfect. They may be preceded by an eye roll or two when mommy says, "We need a family meeting." And there's always the chance someone will get mad and leave the meeting in a huff. But we all have come to respect the process and keep learning, keep leaning in, even when it is uncomfortable, because we know they help us navigate the murky waters of living and traveling together as a full-time family. After moving onto the Dawn Treader, we held a family meeting to discuss the color code system, and the kids added a few colors of their own. Here are a few additions, according to now 8-year-old Samuel. Lemon lime it could be good, it could be bad, we have to wait and see. Tangerine means drop everything and help, no matter what. And rainbow means free for all, run crazy, whatever you want. There were a few more suggestions too, but in the end, we old folks mostly just used the traditional 4 colors: green, yellow, orange, and red, when we did our best to respect the kids' need to throw a rainbow in every now and then along the way. Our color code system was just one of the many ways we communicated on the boat. Another communication system we developed, a nonverbal system, which saved our sanity and our relationship many times during our liveaboard days, also used color as a key component, specifically color markings on the anchor chain. Whenever you arrive to a new anchorage, there is the potential to find yourself in a very stressful situation, which very quickly, especially if number 1, the water is murky. Number 2, the conditions are rough. And number 3, the neighbors are judgy. You can usually find a way to keep your calm with the first 2, but for some reason, when you are facing the third, it seems like all decorum goes out the window and the chance of yelling at your beloved increases exponentially. This might seem counterintuitive given the fact that you know people are watching you, but there it is. Anchoring, docking, and mooring, which is when you pick up one of those big floating balls anchored to the seafloor, are the worst times for couples who haven't quite worked out whatever anger issues are lurking beneath the surface. During our time on Hakuna Matata and Dawn Treader, we developed systems for each of these scenarios to help us stay calm and stay married. Let's start with anchoring. Anchoring problems never seem to happen in a remote anchorage where you have perfect sand bottoms with no coral heads in perfectly calm conditions. I suppose those conditions help keep you calm enough that you can easily troubleshoot any issues that arise. Instead, anchoring problems seem to happen when you unexpectedly find yourself anchoring in a spot that looks good on the chart, but which actually has a wicked current you didn't expect. Or they may happen in a crowded anchorage that is your only safe option with a storm quickly closing in. In other words, anchoring problems happen when you are stressed and all eyes are on you. I now realize that for the most part, the other boats aren't really all that interested in your drama. They are only interested enough to make sure you don't come too close to their own boat. When all eyes are on you because things are so obviously going wrong, the truth of the matter is that those are generally not judging eyes upon you. Those are fellow sailors who have been in your deck shoes before, watching and waiting supportively to see if there is anything they can do to help. Actually, when I think about this, it isn't unlike parenting. You spend so much time worried about the other parents who are giving you scornful looks in Walmart or on an airplane, only to realize that they were really just the understanding looks of other seasoned parents who have been through the same. If only we could get inside our own heads and give ourselves some grace to stop from assuming the worst about those nosy neighbors' thoughts. One way I found to help myself when I think I hear voices judging me or see the eyes upon me is to tell myself they aren't judging, they're understanding. Even if this isn't true, it helps me. If I tell myself that I am surrounded by love and support, I quickly find that I am. The other thing I do when I'm filled with doubt or stress or general weakness is to communicate early and often when I see things start to go wrong. My natural instinct is to scream and run away, but as I have grown a bit more mature, I force myself to lean in, look for the root of the problem, and then develop a system to make things better. In the case of anchoring, I realized the problem came down to two issues: anchor chain length/depth and wind noise. The way anchoring works is that one person is at the helm steering the boat with the engines on, while another is at the bow looking at the seafloor and trying to determine the best spot to drop anchor. If the bottom is covered with seagrass or otherwise unclear, this can be very difficult. Gratefully, most of the places we were dropping anchor, like the Bahamas, usually had crystal clear water with white sand bottoms. The problem was that the water was so clear that it was difficult to tell if you were looking at the bottom through 10 feet or 100 feet of water. But when we first learned how to set an anchor together, we were in Florida, where the water is brown and murky 90% of the time. Not only could we not see the bottom, but we had to consider the depth, the current, the wind, and the number of boats around us. All of these factors would mean we would have to put out more or less anchor chain. I found that when we got to an anchorage, Captain Nate would always ask, "How much chain is out?" To which I would respond with something like, "How the heck do I know?" With or without expletives, depending on how annoyed or hangry I felt at the time, and whether or not the children were in earshot. This would drive Nathan nuts because he just has this inherent sense of how much chain has been put out and naturally thought that I should know this too. Gratefully, he realized by trial and error of yelling at me and not getting the response he wanted that hollering at me would never solve this problem. Instead, he went down to the local hardware store and spent about $25 to buy spray paint, fluorescent green, yellow, and orange, to mark the anchor chain and save our marriage. With the paint in hand, we pulled out the entire length of the anchor chain and started measuring 25 feet sections on the deck beside Hakuna Matata. Green at 25 feet, yellow at 50, orange at 75, double green at 100. The idea was that this way, when Captain Nate asked how much chain was out, I would actually know the answer. Problem one is solved. But the second problem was still an issue: communication between the bow and the helm. I have seen couples communicating from the helm to the bow with the use of fancy headsets so that no one else can hear them at all. But what's the fun in that? I mean, don't you want the world to benefit from witnessing your amazing performance that leaves your boat anchored so beautifully in the exact perfect spot? There ought to be a trophy for those moments when you actually accomplish this without yelling at each other or at the dog or the kids. Unfortunately for us, by the time we realized we needed a better system, we were no longer in the land of plenty, i.e. the United States mainland, so buying fancy headsets wasn't an option. As with so many things when living on a boat in the islands, we simply went back to the basics to solve the problem and started using hand signals. Hey, somebody's here. Hello. It's a long chapter. I hope you're enjoying it. Feel free to put a comment in and let me know you're here if you want. Certainly there is a fancy school of sailing somewhere that has already developed more specific hand signals for every scenario, and I certainly wish I had gone through such a school. But fancy sailing school was no more an option at that time than fancy headsets, so we just came up with hand signals that worked for us. Basically, this involved me standing on the bow with my arms representing the current position of the anchor. If the chain was right below us, my arms would be down and by my side. If the chain was forward of the boat and off to starboard, then my arms would be in front of me and to the right. If I held my arm up with a closed fist, it meant hold or stop the boat right there. It wasn't sophisticated, but it worked. By using these hand signals, we managed to anchor the big boat in many tight anchorages while still keeping our relationship intact. Anchoring problem 2 was solved. If anchoring is where you cut your teeth as a cruising couple, docking is where you graduate college. If you can survive docking with the love of your life without killing each other or destroying the boat in the process, then you are surely soulmates. The thing about anchoring, even when it isn't done gracefully, is that you can always pull up the anchor and try again if it fails. Trying to pull your boat, which also happens to be your family's home, up to a concrete structure with currents, while currents and wind conditions are working against you, takes a special kind of confidence or chutzpah, which may come across as insensitive and decidedly unromantic. Truth be told, I think the fear of docking is the main thing that held me back from wanting to learn to captain the boat myself. It is one thing to be mad at my beloved for yelling at me, the kids, or the deckhand, or the dog, as I try to secure the fenders or the ropes while he steers the ship. It's another thing to be the one doing the steering. Plus, with kids on board, the times we are docking tend to be the most stressful as a mommy. I'm always worrying that someone will fall overboard as the boat shifts directions and get trapped or crushed between the boat and the dock. Seriously, docking is usually a nightmare for me. Gratefully, Nathan is a docking expert. Yes, we could probably improve how we communicate in the key clutch moments, but I have deep admiration for how he handles those stressful situations. While I'm busy stressing out about the safety of our kids and our boat, he somehow always manages to ease the Dawn Treader smoothly into the slip. I've seen it said that sailors are excellent parallel parkers, and I can see why. Unless your boat has bow and stern thrusters to push you in the proper direction, which are usually seen on larger, more expensive yachts, you have to rely on the engines and the currents to line up the side of your boat to the dock. Because of the increased potential for injury to people or property, it is always code yellow when we're docking. The kids and I, along with any nannies or guests on board, stand on the side that will be approaching the dock with ropes or fenders in hand. Uh-oh. Cut out. The most important thing we learned over the years of docking with Captain Nathan at the helm is to just be ready and be quiet until he gives the order to take some kind of action. This sounds easier than it is for me. For starters, there's the husband-wife dynamic where I don't like taking orders. There's also a lot of times where I don't fully understand the approach he's taking, and I have to fight my urge to chime in. There's the added factor of our strong, confident children who don't like taking orders either. Plus, just to make communication even more challenging, there are times when we have to speak up during the docking process. The helm of the Lagoon 450 catamaran is situated on a flybridge, which is great for seeing distances, but has blind spots for seeing the perimeter of the boat at the waterline. From the helm, Nathan can't always see if there's a pylon in the water, for example. Those are the times that the crew on the lower deck need to alert him immediately so he can quickly reverse course. Far from the finesse of the color code system, so far the only method we have developed for docking communication is yelling. This is not my favorite thing, but even in this, I think we have improved a lot. Together, we have learned over the years that there is a big difference between yelling to someone and yelling at them. The first ensures information gets to the person that needs it quickly and clearly. The second makes everyone around you feel like garbage. After 21 years of marriage, whether docking, anchoring, traveling, or parenting together, this is a system we are committed to work on the same way we do most other things, together. And that was chapter 18, Color Code Systems, Losing Sight of the Shore, How to Live on a Boat Without Killing Your Family. And that was a chapter about literally how to make sure to do that without killing your family. I see that the signal is not great, but I wanted to give a shout out to my friend Howard Spillman. I really enjoy having you here. It makes me feel like I'm not just talking to myself. This chapter in particular makes me smile because my family is leaving very soon. Nathan and Samuel will be heading to Spain in less than a week, I think. What is today, the 6th? Yeah, in a week. And Ziva and I'm leaving, we're leaving on the 23rd. So yeah, a big change is afoot. We still have to arrange Nala's transportation. Well, we've arranged it, but we have to get her papers. And I just keep thinking about this color code system, and I'm thinking maybe I need to go buy a headset while I'm here in the land of plenty. Anyway, thank you so much for being here, Howard, and everyone else who is watching on the replay. I really appreciate you. And I do share more videos and details of our upcoming adventure and my writing on my Substack. That's rosalindaromán.substack.com. Thanks for checking out my live stream. Apparently I just lost my voice, so it's time for me to go. Thanks so much for being here. Take care. Have a great day.